I had tried doing a number of labels during the 90s. And the first one that I tried to do was called The 7 Deadly Sins of Horror, and I got it over at Miramax to develop. And the idea there was to do a series of 7 horror movies that would be independent, developed for the directors and use all the main genre directors, stars, and effects guys in this, and each director would get a sin. And so I had lined up Dario Argento, Stewart, Mary Lambert, George Romero, I think Richard Stanley. So we had all these directors lined up, and each one had a sin, and we were developing scripts, and it was going to be like this label. And I'm you know, I think that the Masters of Horror got a lot of inspiration from that, because I did talk to the creator of that about it. But the 7 Deadly Sins never got greenlit. The Miramax, or it was Dimension, never greenlit one of them. One of the ones that we had was actually made into a movie that was presented to us, but we never went forward, and that was the one called Idle Hands. That was supposed to be Sloth. So this was an idea for me to make a label based on two things. One was that when I was a kid, I noticed that I loved certain groups of movies, the Universal horror, the William Castle, you know, 13 Ghosts, House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler. Then I loved Corman's Poe series, Pit and the Pendulum, Fall of the House of Usher, Mask of the Red Death, Premature Burial, The Raven. Wow, I loved those movies. And in fact, you know, I think on Tales of Terror, that, you know, Corman used to pour paint as the opening credits, these colorful, it sort of seemed like blood in a way, but it was really paint. And I loved how graphic it was. And so for Reanimator, I made sure that I insisted on having a real credit sequence, colorful, real credit sequence. And almost every movie, whenever I can, I try to do that, because I think it's the one place you can actually do a short film with great freedom. And it was inspired by the Poe series. Then Hammer films. And I noticed that with Hammer films, for example, when I would go to the video store to rent a movie, if I'm looking through the racks and I'd come up with, you know, the Reptile Lady, you know, and I'd go, that's a Hammer movie. I said, I haven't seen it. It must be one of the bad ones. I've got to see it. Because it was a Hammer. And so that means that it had value outside of its value as a movie, as what it was, because it was part of a group of movies. Just like when you watch the Universal horrors, Dracula's Daughter, you want to see it. You want to see Ghost of Frankenstein. You want to see Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. Now maybe some of them aren't so good, but it's part of the group. Some people watch all of Nightmare on Elm Street, even though some of them are worse than others. So the value of the label for me was very important. Then I was making my movie career ended up in the low budget range. And you know, it's probably, you know, some of it's just luck, and some of it's, I think, because we tend to gravitate towards the level maybe of our talent or our interests or our aesthetic. And for me, you know, I went from producing, then I wanted to direct and write. And so I think that then when you want those jobs, you start getting into smaller and smaller levels, unless you happen to be somebody quite extraordinary. And so for many reasons, then I end up making these, you know, I get carried away making Necronomicon instead of making a, you know, working on a bigger picture. I've always, you know, I like that. So that meant to me that the only way to make a living at it is that I have to make a lot of movies, because the reason that most people don't want to make low budget movies is that a low budget means a low fee. You get your fee based on the budget. And also for a director who has made movies, you know that you can't hide behind a low budget. If there's problems on the production, and it's not just up to the director or the writer, it's a whole group of people that make a movie, and if it clicks, it's like a team on a sports team. You can have some really talented players, but if the whole team and the coach and the ownership doesn't work, the team doesn't work. And a movie's like that. That's why a lot of people always want to use the same team. Like Clint Eastwood always uses all the same people, because then he knows what he's going to get. Their success will follow their last success. When you're doing low budget, maybe you don't get the actor you wanted. Maybe the DP isn't as good as you wanted. Maybe the producer's crazy. Maybe you don't get the location and the props, and everything starts not quite working. So for a movie maker, a big budget, you can protect yourself. You can do things over if they don't work. On a low budget, you can't. So the idea of doing a lot of movies is to be more efficient and to make enough money. And so my theory was that I could always have, if I have a movie in production, I could always be posting another one and preparing another one. So you could really do 3 at a time. And I thought, well, this is the way to make a label. And then however much energy you put into a movie, you never know if it's going to be good or bad. You always hope it's going to be great, and it's never as good as you wished it would be, and it's never as bad as you're afraid it is. But you're safer if you just keep working.
What the hell? What's the matter? Don't like my art?
And so that was my great intention, and I kept pushing these labels. I kept going to all kinds of different companies in LA trying to sell this idea of a label. And then I went to Spain to Sitges Festival with, I think it was like Dentist 2. And I couldn't get away just for the weekend. I remember I was like, oh man, I go all the way to Spain from LA for 2 days. And I thought, well, you just do these things, And I went, and the guy that was distributing the movie was Julio Fernandez of Filmax. And I had met him some 10 or 12 years earlier when I went to Sitges for Society. And he was with another company then, and they were distributing it. I grew up in Latin America, so I knew street Spanish. My Spanish was not sophisticated. It's what I picked up. I never studied it, but I picked up on the streets so I can kind of get along. And that helped a lot, because Julio didn't speak English. And so when I saw him again 12 years later, he said, now I've got this huge company, why don't you come to Barcelona and make a movie? And I said, well, what I'd really like to do is do a line of movies. There's no reason why you can't do them in Spain. I said, I've made movies, we made From Beyond and Dolls in Rome. I made Crying Freeman in Vancouver. You can make the movies anywhere. You don't have to make them in Los Angeles. And so then he got very interested about this. And he said, well, I'd like to do that. I want to go into production because we're a video distributor and all this. And we can use Spanish subsidies. And I said, okay, well then, if you want to do it, let's do it. And I think within 3 months I had moved to Spain, and we were going to the AFM pre-selling our first 4 movies. And the first 4 movies were FAUST, Dagon, Arachnid, and Beyond Reanimator. Now, we only had a script. We had a script for FAUST that had been developed by Ted Chalmers, who was a friend of mine, and he was a sales guy, but he was also involved with trying to finance movies, and he had developed FAUST from this comic book. It's kind of a very violent, pornographic comic book. And at one time, he was trying to get Stewart to direct it. And it was kind of pornographic.
That's it, huh? That's all there is to it.
There's no grand design here.
It was, and I got it, and I kind of liked the script. So I knew about that, because I went through a lot. When I first went to Spain, I couldn't get anybody to send me scripts. They said, "Where are you? You know, Spain, they don't make movies in Spain, do they?" And even the Spanish used to tell me, no, we can't make those kind of movies. So in US they can make them, but not here. Now, of course, I go to Italy or Germany and they say, oh, the Spanish, they can make those movies, but we can't make those movies here. You know, it's kind of cuckoo.
I make such a mess when I play.
But that was where I was at. The people in LA that I knew wouldn't even send me scripts because they didn't know what the hell I was doing, being outside. So I did have a lot of options, and I found a few scripts. And I got Arachnid from Mark Sevi, which was a giant spider. And then and then I thought Faust, because it's something kind of superhero but with an edge. And then the Dagon was a script I'd been carrying around for so many years. And then I thought Beyond Reanimator, we didn't need a script. That was just that was going to be that was going to bring them in, and we'd make it last. Same as my theory with Society and Bride of Reanimator. If they want that, they've got to go through the rest of them. And then I asked, we got immediate interest from Lionsgate, because Trimark had, I had worked at Trimark making movies for Trimark with Mark Amin, the owner of the company, and he financed Return of the Living Dead 3. He's the guy that got the rights, and then I developed it to make it. And then he's the guy who came up with the idea of doing The Dentist. So I did Dentist and Dentist 2 with him. We had a good relationship. And so I went to him with the package, and by that time he was selling his company to Lionsgate. So we just moved right into Lionsgate, and they bought the package for the US. That was in the newspapers in Spain. They'd never had a Spanish movie pre-sold. It was big news.
Looking good.
So then we had to make the movies, and it was really, really difficult. It was really complicated. And then I called Stewart and I said, listen, you want to direct one? I was trying to get Stewart to direct one. I wanted Tobe Hooper to direct one. I forget who else. So I had a few directors, and Stewart was game. And I said, okay, here's the choice. Do you want to do Faust or do you want to do Dagon? And he said, well, I want to do Dagon. I said, okay, then I'll do the other. If he wanted Faust, I would have done Dagon.
I'm going in.
Lieutenant, you can't! Hold your fire. The lieutenant's going in.
And then when I took Faust, then I called up Jeffrey and I said, Jeffrey, here's the script, pick a part. And so he picked the detective. He says, I never get that kind of part, you know? So he chose the part. I didn't choose it for him. I just said, you got to be in it.
All my life I've wanted the truth. Now I am the truth!
It was difficult to get people to come, and we ended up doing most of our casting for these movies out of UK anyway. It's so hard to get the Americans, and you had the union problem. But so anyway, we began Faust, and I began working on the script to try to make, you know, I wasn't familiar with the comics, so I had to read all the comics, and I wanted to be true to the comics. And then it was a superhero movie, and this is before digital was really good enough on the low budget. So we had to do mostly puppet and makeup effects. It was quite challenging to do a movie in Spain and see if we could do it in English and see if we could make, I didn't want it to look like Spain. I didn't want anybody to think it was a Spanish movie because then we can't sell it. So I tried to set it in, it's set in New York, and I tried to make Barcelona look like the States and tried to see if I could take these Spanish actors and these Spanish effects guys. I got George over though. I got Screaming Mad George to come to do the key effects. It was a big, big challenge. It about killed me, this movie. And it was mad because nobody knew what we were doing except Julio. Julio didn't know, but Julio was the only guy that believed. Nobody believed in this. It was like me and Julio Fernandez. And so we were, kind of tilting at windmills. I remember I went to a festival in the south of France soon after we finished Arachnid, and it was at that festival, but somewhere they had an article about the Fantastic Factory, and they characterized Julio and myself as Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. And so I thought, wow, I'm Sancho Panza. I'm like riding a burro or something. I thought this is probably a good indication of the Fantastic Factory. And of course, I loved having the label, and I liked the fact that I had a label now, and I was going to make movies under a label. So with FAUST, it was just crazy. We just were doing something completely new in Spain. Nobody had a clue. They were just shaking their heads, and some people were into it, but what it was going to turn up like, nobody had a clue. And I was just trying my darndest and I'd never done a superhero movie. That's really tough without any real money, And then we tried to do transformations, and of course for me, I had a hard time with the capes on superheroes. I had a hard time with the suit, because once again, I want to have the logic of the mythology. And so, I remember when I talked to Stuart about it, because originally the guy sings songs when he kills. He sings James Brown songs. But quickly it became clear that these songs, it's like 100, 200 grand for the rights if they'll let you sing it while he's killing. And then I just didn't know how to do that. I'm sure Stuart could have pulled it off. And I asked Stuart, I said, this suit, I don't know, these guys wearing tights and a suit and a cape and, I don't know about this stuff. And he said, yeah, you just use a silk cape, because he sees it as a theater. It's between the actors. And I could never look at it that way. So of course what I do is I go, well, the way it works is it comes out of his skin. So then I got George to come up with this whole way we would make the cape and the suit actually come out of his skin, and then we had to do it with rubber effects. So you have this whole complicated sequence where you see him change. Of course, it's pretty old school, but that was where my mind went,
I love your duplicitous games. But you dare not push me too far, dearest.
And then there was scenes like the girl who turns into the old woman. There's a traditional horror movie scene, probably best done in The Shining, in which a man is seduced by a beautiful, usually naked, gorgeous woman. And as he makes love to her, we see she's really a rotting corpse, or she's an old hag. And I think that the reason people are so attracted to that scene is because that's really reality. That flesh just gets old. And when you're in love with the flesh, that's what you're loving, is something that decays. So this is if you condense time, that's what that beautiful girl is. She's an old hag, not too long. And so I think this really attracts people, the idea that the flesh dies, and I think that it's really the core of Edgar Allan Poe and Gothic romance, which is really the origin of horror. Modern horror is basically Gothic romance literature filtered through the universal horror look, you know. And I think that, you know, Poe was always having people in love with a beautiful dead corpse. And a lot of his poems focus on this idea that if you love Astarte instead of Eros, you know, it's better that when you're in love with the flesh, it's horror. You have to be in love with the more eternal. And so I think this theme always works. In the comic books, the beautiful horror woman turns into an old hag. The M turns her into an old hag, shows her what she really is. And I saw that as being, I just seen it a lot. So of course I wanted to go more extreme with it. So I thought that I talked with George and we decided we would do this kind of thing where she just becomes tits and ass.
What's going on here?
So just push the physicality, the sexual symbols, and push it to the point where it's just disgusting.
No. That you betray me only insofar as it serves my purpose.
And so that's what we did. And what's really funny about it is it's done all with models and in-camera effects. Today we would do it with digital and it'd be really cool looking. But I think there's something about puppets that they really have a reality to it that gets us, you know. And so in some ways that scene is just, I mean, it's absurd, but there's something kind of cool about it too. But that's basically, you know, Faust was kind of a movie that we didn't have any idea where it was headed. And I was just trying to give it a look and give it some energy. And we put all this heavy metal music in it because I thought that was like the spirit of it. I tried to, I liked the idea of this guy who just couldn't help himself but be ecstatic and murder and killing and slicing.
Hello, Jay. Forget something?
Stop or I'll shoot you!
Here, little piggies. Welcome to my show.
I think it's a pretty typical hero these days, but it was a little less typical then, and I think it was a very ambitious movie for the budget, and it kind of worked, I think I was never really, I thought it didn't quite resolve itself very well in the big finale, but I think there's some great stuff in it. I think there's some wonderful scenes in Faust, and they have it has an energy that's quite, I think it's different.
What do you think, brother? Too much blood or not enough?